What's up? How you doing, everybody? Hey, Kenny, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing? It's so good to be here with all these ministry leaders from literally all the way around the world. Looking through the comments, if you hopefully everyone's posting who you are and what church you're with and where you're from. But literally, so many different states, and I saw somebody from Dubai and other places, Canada. So welcome everybody to the thing. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, doing well. Excited to talk about recruiting some volunteers. It's pretty cool to have people from all over the world. I'm looking at all these listed church names and cities and things like that, which is just a lot of fun. So if you're just joining, make sure you drop that in there. Put your role at your church, your location, all that stuff. Let us know. Actually, here's something I thought we should do real quick in the chat before we get running. How many volunteers do you need to recruit? Like maybe you know,
Ooh,
maybe you don't know, and you're gonna make it up. Put that in the chat. I'd love to know
that's
that.
great. That's great. I don't have access to the chat, so I'll say that I'm a children's pastor at Mariners Church in Irvine, California, and we've been aggressively going multi-site. We just launched 4 campuses this fall, so we're recruiting like crazy, and so my number is 150. We've been
150. Not that many.
150. No, not that many. We're up. We just did a quarterly dashboard, and we're up 11% over last quarter. So we've been working really hard. But here's the deal: what's been working for us, and how we've been able to recruit as many volunteers as we have, is the stuff we're talking about today. And so, and it works at big churches, it works at small churches, it works everywhere. So super excited about that. So good, yeah. Everyone put that in there. Whether you need 10 volunteers or you need 100 volunteers or 15 volunteers, that's why we're doing this webinar today. 5 steps to recruit volunteers now, because because we need them now. I need
That's
them
right.
now, and so
That's
hopefully we're
right.
going
I
to get
see
there.
Elaine said 61. So I'm like that. Okay, that's an exact number. Like somebody's
It's
keeping
very
track.
specific.
Yeah,
Somebody
that's
has done their
awesome.
homework. They know exactly how many they need.
Which is important. Well, so when I'm actually doing this right now. In fact, when we start talking about this, steps 1 and 2, I'm doing them right now. But it is a little complicated for me because I'm trying to do this and help a bunch of our different ministry staff. So it's not about just one ministry that I'm going to recruit to. So if I don't even know the actual number because it's different numbers for different ministries, right? Like preschool needs this many, elementary needs this many, student ministry needs this many, whatever it is. So I will find out though, because like we're going to talk about here, you got to get specific about that. Lots of like
That's
25 to 50 or 60. I mean, that's a popular range. 4 to 5 more. Love it.
that's so awesome. Here, I'm seeing people. Somebody from Cross Point in Nashville. Shout out to you. One of my best friends in ministry just became the campus pastor at Mount Juliet. Uh, there at Nashville, I got a lot of friends there. So good to see you guys, and so good to see your needs. Like I love it. Like there's some people that have like 50 or 60, and then somebody just posted 3. That's great. Let's help you get the 3 that you need, because if you need 3, then you can feel as desperate as if you needed 300. So we're gonna work on that today. I'm really excited about this. Nick, you and I have been practitioners of this for decades, and over the years, just like everyone else here, we've learned through the School of Hard Knocks. We've had some great mentors in our lives,
Yep.
people
True.
like Jim Weidman and people like Sue Miller and people like Christine Kreischer, like other like amazing authors and ministry leaders. And we've been practitioners, and we've learned a lot as we've done this. And for the last like 2 years or so, we've developed some courses and some resources that have helped us be more strategic about how we recruit volunteers. Because one thing that you and I both know is that what's intuitive about volunteer recruiting isn't always the best way to do it. There's some systems and processes that if we do it, it becomes a numbers game. It becomes like, if you do these things, you're going to get this many leads. And from this many leads, you're going to get this many volunteers. And so it becomes like a very systematic process. And we've created some resources like the volunteer playbook that you wrote, and then volunteer pipeline that I wrote, which is all about onboarding. Last year, we released Volunteer Boost, which was like a really fun 28-day challenge to recruit as many volunteers as you can. And it was so awesome and so fun. And I've been using it as well. So, and that's kind of what this webinar is about today, about like, helping, taking some of the best of all those things and putting them into a webinar of how people can start utilizing stuff right now to recruit more volunteers right now. Right.
Yep. Do you see, I need Infinity volunteers, Harvest kids. I don't think we can do that for you. That's definitely one of the ones where the
No,
lawyers
but
would say,
hey,
you can't promise that. Yeah, no promises
but
there.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this. This has been like a long-term dream of mine, and I've shared this recently. Here's what I want, Nick. Okay, can I share it? I'm going to be very vulnerable here.
Go for it.
I want
Nobody's going to hold you to this or anything.
I want a freaking waiting list. I want people to sign up. I want to work with babies, and I'm like, you know what? We should have a space in 6 weeks. All right, we'll put you on the list. That's what I want. I've heard rumors. It's like legend. It's like like the fountain of youth. I've heard rumors. Like there's been churches at different seasons and different times that have experienced that. Why can't we dream for that? Why can't we hope for that? So maybe not infinity, but maybe enough to where we don't have space for somebody for a certain position because we got enough people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and if you think about it, two of the ways you think about recruiting when you hear volunteer recruiting, you think about some kind of big announcement from stage or some kind of all call push, or you think about like a tap on the shoulder, hey, can you serve? And this is like neither of those. You know what I mean? But in some ways, it will leverage the power of both. The mass part of the mass invite, like the fact that it can scale and you can reach out to a ton of people, and then the personal part of the tap on the shoulder, but is really, I guess, in the middle, of those two strategies. It's like the best of those two, hopefully in one. So yeah, we're going to talk. Yes, what Kenny said, a waiting list. Yes, that would be awesome. That does sound like fairy tale land, but you never know. You never know. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
We'll see what we can do.
Well, but here's the thing too: to see what, like, whenever you become the new guy again at a place, sometimes you see a lot of growth happen quickly. And for me to look back and to see what happened over the last year, and I've been working harder than I probably should. Like, my wife and I probably need to go see a counselor. I've been a little bit of workaholic. But to see what happened over the last year, man, another year of that, like we could get there. Like we could actually get really close to something like this. So I think, but we're going to talk about this in a little bit too, because the reason oftentimes we don't have the volunteers we need is because we're not working hard enough at it, or there's certain things that we're not doing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Nick, is there anything else you want to talk about before we get started?
I would say put your questions in the chat. We're going to make this available for replay. So, I mean, you're here, so you're going to see it. But if you had to step out early or something like that. So, because we're going to make it available for replay, though, we won't be interacting in the chat basically as we present all of these 5 steps. But then what we'll do is at the end, we're going to come back and scroll through and ask any questions you might have. So, you could put those questions in the chat as we go. You could write them down and save them for when we come back and interact again at the end, however you want to do that. But just know that's how we're going to approach it. I think that's it.
That's great. Yeah, so we're going to record, and then we'll do some Q&A after we turn the record button off, and we'll answer all your questions. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them.
Maybe not. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what time allows. You ready to go?
Yeah, ready.
Let's do it. Well, welcome to 5 Steps to Recruit Volunteers Now. I'm Nick Blevins, Next Gen Pastor at Community Christian Church in White Marsh, Maryland. And Kenny?
Yes, my name is Kenny Conley. I'm the children's pastor at Mariners Church in Irvine, California. And we're super excited to be here to talk about like the most demanding topic that people need answers to is how do I get more volunteers? And even more importantly, how do I get more volunteers right now? And so we're going to talk about that today in this webinar, unpacking some resources that we have through Ministry Boost, but we've kind of taken the best of a lot of different resources and we put them together in this fun, free webinar for you to you can start on these today and you can start making a difference today.
Definitely. And we have courses, like you said, on this, but we wanted to do something free because not everybody can pay for a course or join Ministry Boost membership or whatever. So I don't know how you view it, Kenny, but I view it like we're going to take 70 to 80% of kind of the strategy of what we teach in some of those courses, mixed with maybe 20 or 30% of all the tactics, because we don't have time for all that, and just give it away here in this webinar to help you recruit more volunteers in 5 steps. So that's the goal. So if we're ready, I'll jump right in. You good?
Yeah. Because here I'll add to that what you just said too, because like the ministry playbook, that's like a 12-week. It's long. It's 10 weeks or 10 units to get through that. The volunteer pipeline is 5 units. The volunteer boost is 28 dates. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And if you're serious about like, hey, we need to like do a lot, those sources, those resources, those courses, if you work through those, as yourself as a leader or with your team, you will have an impact. They will have an impact. However, we're going to tell you basically the basics. This is like the top level. This is how you do it. Okay, this is how you do it. Now, this webinar here, it's not going to include any call scripts or text scripts. All those things come in our courses and resources. We're going to tell you this is the secret sauce. When you and I were figuring out how to do this, like this, if we had known this stuff, we'd be in a much better place than we are today. So that's basically, this is the know-how. This is, you're going to walk away today knowing if I do these things, I'm going to have more volunteers very soon. Very soon.
Yeah.
It's a quick way to do it.
Yep, and we built it to be actionable. So it's not like we just tell you about, I don't know, the why in this webinar. It really is. When we end, you should be able to work on steps 1 and 2. And depending on some things, some factors, you could actually do steps 1 and 2 before the end of the day. Now that you might have some hangups, we'll talk about that. But that's the idea. You can make a lot of progress just with this webinar. So, all right, here we go. You ready to recruit? We'll jump in, start talking about step number 1. You got to make the time. Anytime I get a chance to talk about volunteer recruiting with other ministry leaders, maybe it's at a conference breakout, maybe it's around a lunch with other church leaders at some conference or thing like that. If I say, how many hours a week do you spend on volunteer recruiting? And I'll usually ask people to raise their hand and say, is it 0 hours? Is it 1 hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it 4 hours? Almost all of the answers are less than 2 hours. Most of them are none. Most people will hold up a 0, a goose egg. Some people will say 1 hour a week, and some people will say 2. And the number of people that say more than 2, like 3 or 4, I mean, it's like 3%, 2%, something like that. Because I think what they're saying is what we've all felt. We need volunteers, but sometimes the urgency of other things take the place of it, and we just don't give it the time that it needs. We don't spend enough time doing it, and instead it hits us every weekend or whenever our ministry meets, and we wish we had that time. So I want to talk about how to make the time so that you actually are giving it the time that it needs. And number 1, and this is about freeing up your current time to make time for recruiting, okay? So number 1 is to create a stop doing list. Now, there's a whole exercise I learned years ago. I don't know if I read it in a book or who I got it from. I wish I could credit them with this. But it was the idea that whenever you're trying to manage all of the things on your plate, you should create 3 lists. A list of things only you could do, and you got to be really, specific that only you could do these, right? A list others could do, and then there's this list right here. It's the stop doing list, the things that nobody needs to do. We could actually just stop doing this, and this could be a task, a project, something that's recurring, something that's just not getting the return on the investment that you need. It could be any of those things, but I would encourage you to think through, just offhand, spend maybe 10 minutes brainstorming, what could I stop doing? And maybe you even need to think through a week. What do I do in a week? And I list all that first, and then I go through and I pick, okay, what are the lowest priority items on here? What could I stop doing? And then the next thing I want you to think about is, what could I pause or delegate? So the stop doing list is more about your plate, your responsibility. It might be tasks. The pause and delegate is more like what your ministry does. So this isn't just your task. This is what is seen, sent, programmed, planned. So, for example, and I want you to think outside the box here too. Don't automatically assume, I can't stop doing that. I can't pause that. I can't delegate that. Think about a communication that's sent every week. Does it have to go every week the next 4 weeks? Could it hit pause and it doesn't go out for a month? Social media. I love social media. I think we should totally use social media as a church. I think it's a great front door for people. I think it's a great way for people to get a sense of the culture of our church. But would your ministry benefit from you pausing social media for 6 weeks to focus on volunteer recruitment? Or could you delegate it to somebody? I think about Laura, who runs the children's ministry Instagram for my church, who does it way better than any of our staff ever would. That was delegated to her, and she's done an awesome job with that. So make a list of all the things your ministry does, and what could you pause or delegate? And this might be outside your sandbox, right? You can't just make that decision by yourself. That's okay. Talk to whoever leads you and say, I want to focus hard on volunteer recruiting for 8 weeks to get the ball rolling. It's going to take me however much time. It could easily take you, if you really want to recruit volunteers well, you could spend 8 hours a week for the first few weeks just building what we're going to talk about here today. And then after a few weeks, maybe you could dial it back to 4 or 5 hours. And then maybe a few weeks after that, it could be put on what I would call maintenance mode for 2 hours a week. So you could go to your boss and say, I need 6 weeks of this amount of time. I want to stop doing these things. I want to pause these things, and I want to delegate this. What do you think? And I think a lot of leaders would say, yes, that would be beneficial for your ministry. And then finally, as we talk about recruiting every week, the idea is you're going to build this plan that you are always recruiting. If I saw you a year from now, you're not going to say I spend 0 hours a week recruiting. You're going to say I spend 2. And I would encourage you to block off 2 2-hour blocks a week here in the early part. And again, I would actually do more the first few weeks because you might need it to build the things we're talking about. But kind of in the middle there, 2 2-hour blocks. Eventually that could become 2 1-hour blocks. And that's how you recruit. And use the early part of your week for certain tasks and use the late part of your week for some other tasks. And that way you're actually making the time in your calendar. So that's number one, make the time. Kenny, I'm going to bring you back in here, see if you have any comments or thoughts about that before we move on.
Yeah, I have a couple things to say about that, because I would say that you're going to easily spend 2 hours a week just doing the administrative work of recruiting. But if when you're on full on recruiting, what's the time you're spending on the phone? What's the time that you're spending in a lunch or breakfast or a coffee with somebody? And that's where you could really get up to 5 or 6 hours a week, because some of these conversations take time. Sometimes you can double them up. You can have conversations with 2 people at the same time. You can have these conversations on the weekend. There's those sorts of things. But when some people are probably thinking like, okay, what am I spending 8 hours? There's early times of this. Like, what we're going to suggest is that you're probably going to spend 30 minutes to an hour twice a week just managing the administrative part of keeping the volunteer recruiting engine going. And that doesn't include the phone calls, text messages, and one-on-one conversations that you have. So that's kind of where that time's going. And it's crazy to think that so many of us spend 0 or only 1 hour a week recruiting. And I just, like, as someone who needs a lot of volunteers all the time, we just can't afford that. Now, the other thing that I want to add to that, I thought of this too, is a big part of this time piece is accountability. Here's one thing: if you lead a staff, or if you're on a staff team, okay, schedule a 30-minute weekly meeting where you meet with your team and you update where everyone is on the recruiting list. So we use these spreadsheets, which we talk about when we share templates of these spreadsheets in Volunteer Boost, spreadsheets of where you put these leads, and every single lead has a staff person assigned to that lead. And every single week we go over where we at. What calls did we make? What text message did we make? And when everybody's held accountable to that, then a lot more actually happens. People put the time on it. Now, if you don't have a staff, you hold yourself accountable to your boss. Meet with them weekly, even if it's just for 10 minutes. Maybe submit, like, this is like, you're going to submit like, hey, I'm going to submit to you what I've been working on, who I've contacted, who I've been working with. When that is due every single week, it's going to force you to spend time on it and prioritize it. So that's kind of this first step, is just make the time. There's a million other things that are going to fight for your time. And even though volunteers hurts, like when we don't have enough volunteers, we end up getting busy with other stuff, and we don't like really set aside the time. So create some accountability, and submit to that accountability. Have your team to submit that accountability so you can actually make that happen.
Yeah, I would say, if the best case scenario, these steps that we're going to talk about, the best case scenario is a church and all of the ministry staff do it together, because then you're working together. You're helping each other. I mean, that'll be more clear as we get to the other steps. But if you can't do that, which is probably a lot of leaders, that's fine. You can totally do this on your own, but you got to make the time. I suspect when people say they do 1 hour of recruiting a week, what they really mean is, I spend a few hours every 15 weeks when there's like an emergency and we do some things. You know what I mean? I don't even think there's 1 hour a week consistent, or 2 a week or whatever. I think it's like, well, I spend sometime throughout my year when it's really bad. I think that's kind of what people mean. Ready for the next step?
Yeah. Ready for the next step. Make the time, and what's next?
All right, next one, make the list. I think this is the easiest step in the whole process. However, having taught this, Kenny, we've done this through Volunteer Boost and Volunteer Playbook, and we're talking with leaders and doing coaching calls. In fact, I had one probably about 5 weeks ago with somebody who had a hard time with this step. And I actually think it's the easiest step. So we would definitely want to put the emphasis here and do this well. Don't overlook it, because it kind of drives the rest of the process. What you're going to do is you're going to make a list of prospects that you can recruit from. So we don't want to recruit just from an empty void. We don't really just want to recruit from like who we see in the lobby or who we know, because that's a small pool. Even if your church is 200 people, there are people that you don't realize who are involved in your church that you don't know personally. And if you just look at it like who you know, you're going to leave them out. You're going to miss that chance. So as you make a list of prospects to recruit from, the goal is to make that list 10 times your volunteer need. So if I needed 30 volunteers, I want a prospect list of 300 people. Okay. If I needed 4 volunteers, I need a prospect list of 40 people. If I needed 150 volunteers, I need 1,500 prospects on a list. Okay. So that's the key. This is not much math required in the rest of this process, I promise, but a little math right here. And what I find time and time again is that the people that are successful with this process is because they do this right here. They get 10 times the number of volunteers they need on a list to recruit from. And then the folks who aren't as successful, for instance, that call that I mentioned that I had with a leader, part of the problem was she never really had a prospect list. I mean, you could kind of say there was 20 or 30 people on there, but she needed 500, I think, for her need. I think she needed 50 volunteers. And so there was this, I think the thinking was, well, people are going to hear about it because we are doing this announcement from stage. Does that count as my prospects? Like everybody who heard it in the auditorium. No. The prospect list is a real list with actual names, but there's no qualification. The only qualification I would say, let me amend that, is that they're not serving currently. You don't really want to be recruiting from other people's ministries, but as long as they're not serving, they could go on your prospect list. You're not going to qualify that in any different way. Now, to build your prospect list, I encourage you to use your church management system. This is a barrier for a lot of churches because, well, most churches use a church management system, but a lot of them don't use it well. So the idea, like if I asked you, could you go search in your church management system right now, or could somebody on your staff search right now and tell you all the people who are serving? A lot of you watching this would say, no, I don't think we keep track of it well enough, or it's different ministry to ministry or whatever. So you got to fix that. That might be some conversations with leaders above you or other folks on staff, because your church management system is the key here. Make your prospect list by searching for people who don't serve, people who are in groups that don't serve. Maybe it's parents who've attended for a certain amount of time. Maybe it's certain age groups. Maybe, I know a lot of times if you're a children's pastor or a student pastor and the volunteers are going to be working with underage kids, there's some church insurance companies that won't let you have a volunteer work with underage kids unless they've been at your church for 6 months. So that might be a search parameter. Give me people that have been here at least 5 months so that by the time we get them onboarded, they're past that 6-month mark. So that's the idea, is you just use your church management system in a broad scope. You could just search for anybody who doesn't currently serve. I like to do this though, and this is the third step. I like to segment the list. I don't want to, as we talk about the rest of the steps, I don't want to speak to everyone who doesn't serve with the same voice and the same message. For instance, I'll give you an example. I'm doing this right now in our church. I'm making 4 different lists. And all of them are people who don't serve. All of them are people who have shown to be active. So that's how I kind of got the big bucket that I'm making my prospect list from. Within there, I'm going to segment it down into people who have kids in our children's ministry, people who have students in our student ministry, think middle school, high school, people who have both, and people who have neither, right? So that's 4 different category segments of the overall list of people who don't serve, who are active. And that's because when I take the next steps, I will speak to them a little bit more specifically, knowing that they have kids in our kids ministry or students in our student ministry, or they don't, as opposed to just speaking to them all the same. But the key is you have to make the list. I can't tell you how many times somebody says, I need 30 volunteers. So then I'm thinking, okay, you need 300 prospects. And then when they show me or tell me how many prospects they have, it's 70, or it's 120, or it's 50, or something like that. And it's like, no, that's not going to work. So you might have to do some hard work in your church management system and talking to other staff, but you definitely want to get 10 times your volunteer need. Right, Kenny?
Right. So here's a couple of things that I was thinking about as you were talking. One of them is that your pool of people for your list is actually bigger than you think it is, because you may say, well, we have 500 people who attend our church any given weekend. But you also know that like people don't attend every week anymore. Like if you have 500 people attend every weekend, you could potentially have somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 regularly attending people to choose from. Okay. So you could double it or triple that number. So be thinking, about like, you're not just looking for the person that you see every single week, because I've also seen that sometimes people don't attend every week because they don't have something that's really drawing them to be there more regularly. But an opportunity to serve actually is. We see like the consistency of people become much more significant when they join a volunteer team. So this is a great opportunity for you to invite them to more consistency, which means their kids are more connected to their small group. And so like you're inviting them to something really amazing. And here's some ideas, okay? Because some people are probably thinking, okay, so what are the types of lists? I'll tell you 2 or 3 lists that I've been working on, because I told you earlier on, I'm recruiting a lot of people right now. So we did a vacation Bible school this summer. It was the first time I did a vacation Bible school in a really long time. And we had probably half of our vacation Bible school volunteers, they don't serve on the weekend. So that was a list, okay? We made a list of all the people, and we told them, we were very specific when we created our groups for VBS. We grouped the kids by what service they attend on the weekend. So we invited them like, hey, would you like to continue to get to know the same group of boys or girls? They don't have a leader. And we recruited a ton of new volunteers, but we literally worked a list. Okay, here's another list I've got on my board right over here in my office, that we're working on right now too, is that we've got a bunch of junior leaders. Okay, they're 4th and 5th graders that the requirement is that they have to attend a service and be in their small group and their service, and then they serve a service. Okay, we've got here right now, we've got about just under 100 junior leaders. Okay, we have a new list now that we're beginning to work in a few weeks of all their parents who don't serve. So we're finding all the junior leaders who have parents that don't serve. They're all now stuck here for 2 services because their kid is attending a service and serving a service. So we created a list. And some of you may be asking too, like, what that's like, that multiplier of 10 is a bunch. Well, here's the deal. That is like a rule of thumb. Okay, like when you're reaching out to a list, and depending on how warm or cold your list is, that multiplier will be different. Okay, when I'm calling junior leader parents, I expect that it won't take 10 calls to get one yes, because they already believe in the ministry. The VBS people, we got more than 1 out of every 10 because they had a chance to serve. Now, if I'm calling like this random list of parents whose kids come at least 2 times a month, that might be a lower return rate because they're not as invested. So the 10 is a normal number, because some of you may ask, like, well, that's a really big number. Well, it depends on how warm your leads are. Okay, I have some list where my leads are super hot, and I know that I'm going to get a bunch of them. I might get a third of them, but I have other lists that are like super cold. And it might take 20 calls before I get one person that says, okay, I'll come to an orientation. So that's some things I think of, but you have to be working list. You have to be working, who are your list, who are your people on your list, and how are you systematically calling, texting, emailing those people.
Yeah, and Kenny, like this same idea is talked about in the volunteer playbook course, and because it hasn't been updated, it says 4 times your volunteer need. But what we learned was people weren't even doing that, so that's why we increased the number. Because like, okay, if we say 10, and you at least get 5 or 6 times, you're going to be more successful. But for me personally, I don't even limit it. Actually, I know that's my minimum. For me, the 10x is like, okay, I need at least however many. Like for right now, I'd love to help recruit 30 to 50 volunteers, not just for one ministry, but for these different areas of our church. So I know the minimum for me is 300 to 500 people on a prospect list. I don't put a ceiling on it. I mean, it could be 2,000. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I'd let it go that big, and that would be fine. So yeah, don't limit that for sure. And then segment them so you can talk to them specifically.
And basically what we're saying is you're going to get rejected a lot. Okay, so
yes,
got to go ahead and like get your thick skin on. The reason why you're multiplying by 10 is because you're expecting 9 people to say no, or they won't even bother to reply to you. Okay, so you just have to get over that. And this is the numbers game. You need a volunteer. You need to call 10 people, and hopefully you'll get 1. Who knows? Maybe you'll get 2 or 3. But just expect inaction, non-responsiveness, and no's is the name of the game. You're going to get a lot of that, but as you continue to make the calls and the texts, you're going to get lots of yeses as well, and you're going to build your team.
Yes, and that's why. And fortunately, if you don't like, nobody likes hearing no and getting rejected that much. Most of it is inaction or no reply, as you'll see as we talk about the next steps. So most of it isn't, eight, nine people telling you no, one telling you yes. It's more like seven don't even reply or eight don't even reply. Two
Right.
reply. One of them says yes, kind of thing. So yeah, definitely. All right, let's go to the last, not the last step, but the third step here. After you have made the time, you've made your list. Now you have to make the invite. But this is where it's probably different than you're thinking. Because a lot of times, if I say, hey, you're going to invite from this prospect list, you're going to invite people to serve, you might be thinking, I'm going to invite you to serve. But that's not what we want you to do. So, one thing that you can do is you can invite them to a conversation because we're trying to add in some smaller steps and make it more personal. I mentioned we could recruit from stage, and then there's just this mass invite. It's totally not personal, but at least it hits a lot of people. You could recruit by tapping somebody on the shoulder in the lobby, and it's personal. Maybe you even know them, so it's really personal. It's not at scale because it's one person or a few people, however many you can tap on the shoulder. This is kind of a combination of both because you can send it to a lot of people. You can make a big prospect list like we talked about, and then you can reach out to them. And Kenny's going to actually talk about the next 2 points here about how you can reach out to them. But you can invite them to a conversation instead of, hey, could you serve here? Now, sometimes that's fine. But if you really want to work this process well, you're going to invite them to a conversation where you're going to get to know them. Let's say you don't know them. You're going to ask about them, how they find your way to your church, what's their experience been like. Maybe you do know them. And the conversation's more like, how are things going in your life? What's your faith journey like? How are things in your relationship with God? And the way I want you to view this conversation is pastoral. I'm putting on the pastor hat. It's not the volunteer recruiting hat. It's not the ministry leader hat in this moment. I'm just trying to help pastor you and help you take your next best step. It might be serving in my ministry. It might not. It might be in some kind of care group or a small group. And shoot, it might be in somebody else's ministry. And you might have to hand them off and just, be a team player and say, you know what, I think you'd be a better fit for student ministry instead of children's ministry. I don't know how many children's pastors I know would actually say that, Kenny, but I think that's part of what it is you're pastoring them, helping them take their next best step. And then it could be that from there it ends up serving. And you're going to talk about what that could look like, right?
Right, right. So I'm going to keep this list going. So the invite is so important, and so this is where we mess it up sometimes. The quality of the invite was really huge. We want to invite them to a conversation. We're not inviting them to fill out an application. We're not invited. We're going to talk about what we invite them to next. But we're the quality of the invite. We're hoping to have a conversation with these people. And so one of the things to make sure the quality of the invite is high is that we're going to invite using automation. I don't know if you've ever had this issue, but responding to people and you feel like sometimes you type the same exact email over and over and over again. And so I'm a big fan of automation. Okay. If you use Google or Gmail for your email, and I'm sure other providers do the same thing, they have something called templates where you can create an email template. And so when I am recruiting people, I use templates like crazy. And so I have already written emails for somebody who's that first email I'm going to send out to a list. I have already written emails to my second response to people who don't respond. I have an automated email response to people who reply to those things. So so the question well, how do you spend 2 to 4 or 8 hours a week recruiting? A lot of it is you're in the early time, you're going to be spending this time writing these emails, writing these responses, not just with email, but also with text. Okay. So I love to utilize text software. One of my favorites is Easy Texting. And you can create even a drip automation that I've got a group of 100 potential leads, and every Tuesday they're going to get a text message, and the text message is going to be slightly different every Tuesday, inviting them to a conversation. And when people respond to it, then I'll take them out of that group. But this is going to save your sanity some. It's important for you to understand how you're communicating to each list, okay, that you make, and also how you communicate to them all the way through the process of that list. The first time you reach out to them, the second time you reach out to them, the third time you reach out to them, how you reach out to them when they responded to you, how you reach out to them the second time you respond to them because they responded to you and they didn't respond back. Like you can pre-write most of these messages because it's really ultimately the same. So automation is really important. It's going to save you. It's going to make the quality of your invite better because you don't want to send the same invite to somebody who's not heard from you once and one person who's heard from you 3 times. So quality of invite. Use automation for that. And the last one is invite using software. This is a question we're going to answer this in the next step. Is what are you inviting them to? And I would say use software. Okay, it's going to help you. It's going to save you. One of my favorite tools that I use, and if it's just you using, I think it's like $10 a month. It's a really cool software called Calendly. Okay, Calendly synchronizes with my calendar, whether you use Outlook or Google Calendar or whatever it is that you use, Apple, Mac Calendar. I don't remember what it's called. I don't use it, but you can sync with your calendar and you can set aside, hey, I've got 4 hours this week to have phone calls, coffees, lunches, and dinners with people. And instead of me spending a whole bunch of my time texting somebody back and forth, like, hey, does 2 o'clock this Tuesday work? Oh, no, it doesn't. How about 2:30? What about 2 o'clock next Wednesday? No. Nobody's got time for that. Use software like Calendly, or maybe like if you use a church database software like Fellowship One or Planning Center or whatever, you can create an event where you're inviting 2 or 3 volunteers to come to. And so when you send out these emails or these text messages, you're sending them links to where they can book time on your calendar, or they can book an RSVP to come to a meeting. And so the quality of the invite is so important that the goal is that they're going to come and have a face-to-face conversation with you or someone on your team. We want to be intentional about what that invite looks like. So we're going to use automation so that way it can be specific and clear. But then also we're going to utilize software to make it easier. So the way people don't get stuck. They said, yes, they want to meet with you, but you're spending 2 weeks trying to schedule something. So make the invite. It's a really big deal. Nick, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just reinforce what you said. My favorite tool, I use Calendly. When you do the automation too, I think part of what we're trying to do with this strategy and these steps is take the best of the mass invite, which is the mass part, the fact that you can send it to a lot of people, and the personal part of tapping somebody on the shoulder. So when you're like writing this communication, how do you merge in a name field? And be careful with that, Kenny. You have mixed that up sometimes, I believe.
I have.
You have, and sometimes you've actually liked the benefits of that. But you merge in that name field so that it feels personal, and some people are going to know, like, oh, this was obviously just sent through Mailchimp or whatever, and you just merged in my name. But the magic part of it, and that's what we talk about in the Volunteer Boost course, and we have scripts for this, is that you can reply to, and then now it's like, oh, wait a minute, you were paying attention. Like if I say, hey, Kenny, hey, and I invite you to a conversation, and you don't reply, but then next week I do that mass thing again, but it looks like it's a reply. Kenny, you're going to be like, wait, oh, Nick noticed I didn't open the email. I thought it was a mass thing. I didn't realize he was actually talking to me for real. And so it just raises the bar of accountability on their end and makes it more personal. And you can still do all of that with automation and with software if you do it the right way.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story that just happened this last week. I did a child dedication last weekend, and I recruit prayer leaders from the staff, from our elders to pray for those things. And I invited our marriage pastor, and we had a big marriage event last weekend, and I knew that she was booked. I knew that it would be overwhelming, but I invited her anyway because I wanted her to be one of my prayer leaders, and she said yes to me. And so what it was is I have a template email that I use every time I do child dedication, and I invited her. And when I asked her on Saturday, I was like, why did you say yes to this? Because I could tell she was stressed. And she says, because you sent me a personal email. And I laughed and I told her, I said, I didn't send you a personal email. I just changed the first sentence of the email. The rest of the email was the same email that every other joker got. And because I told her in the first set of the email, hey, I know you got a busy weekend, but I'd love for you to be a part. She said yes. So it was a combination of, it was personal to her, but it was automated because I didn't write that email unique to everyone. So this matters. It's one of the values I have is in this process, automation is key, but you got to stay human. You got to feel like a human, not a computer. So the quality of the invite matters. Okay. So moving on, let's to kind of review. We talked about make the time and make the list and then make the invite. This next one is actually make the step. What is it that you're actually inviting people to? This is where I believe that a lot of people go wrong in the volunteer recruiting process, is that you are inviting people to volunteer. And which again is like the goal, and I think it's important. But the problem is that inviting someone like cold turkey, to invite someone to volunteer, that's an immensely hard thing to do. And I think it's important to make that step. So we kind of talked about this in the last one a little bit, of like you're inviting them to a conversation. So I want to kind of break this down. Is first of all, you're going to invite them to one-on-one. Okay, you're going to invite them, like maybe like, because maybe you don't know this person very well, so you're introducing yourself. Hey, my name's Kenny. I'm the children's pastor. I would love 10 minutes of your time this weekend, maybe before or after one of the services. So you're inviting them to an intentional conversation. You can let them know of like, hey, we're building our volunteer team with amazing people, and your name came up on my radar, and I wanted to know if we could have a 10-minute conversation about what it might look like to be a part of the team. What is that you're inviting them to? Don't invite them to volunteer yet, okay? Don't invite them to an application. Invite them to a specific step, okay? A one-on-one meeting. That's a really great thing, okay? Here's something else. Here's another step that's really a good thing. Maybe it's a group meeting. Listen, I don't do all of my meetings. No, it depends. It depends on my list, okay? Sometimes I might recruit, to a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. But sometimes I've got a very particular list, and I might think like, you know what? I could probably meet with 3 or 4 people at a time. And so I'm going to set up some desserts after our Saturday night service. And I'm going to schedule like 3 or 4 of these things over the next 2 months. And I'm going to start emailing this list, and it's like, hey, I want to invite you to a Mariners Kids parent dessert, where we want to talk about what we're doing in our ministry, the exciting things that are happening, and how you might be involved. And so I'm going to use my church management software to create an event, and we're going to put that link in there. And so I'm creating an opportunity to invite them to something really beautiful. We're going to decorate it nice. We're going to have some visionary statements around the room. I'm going to have like my friendliest volunteer to greet them when they come, but I'm being very intentional about what I'm inviting them to. Not an application, not a commitment to serve, but I'm inviting them to come to a meeting where I get a chance to cast vision for serving. The last one under Make a Step is actually maybe inviting someone to an orientation. And this is a part where Nick and I oftentimes spar back and forth. And sometimes it's the difference between one of his courses, Volunteer Playbook, and my course, the Volunteer Pipeline. And the pipeline is an orientation driven model for recruiting. It's actually an onboarding thing. And so it's less about the recruiting people who haven't been in the process of the conversation. And so I'm a big fan of inviting people to an orientation. I want to create a beautiful environment where people can come and they can without any kind of commitment or fear of being like manipulated into something, they can dip their toe into the world of children's ministry to see, or youth ministry, or to some other ministry, to decide if this is what's right for them. And so I feel like I can create a weekly or bi-weekly volunteer orientation that's not a meeting. It's more of like a gathering and then a tour of our facility, and popping your head into different spaces and environments to see what it looks like. And I feel like if I can create this really beautiful experience that's full of vision and full of excitement, I can get a lot more people to say yes to volunteering after they come to an orientation. So I don't ever recruit anyone to volunteer anymore. I just recruit people to come to an orientation. And because I know if I can get them to the orientation, they're very likely to say yes to serving in my ministry. I think I share some of this in the volunteer pipeline, that when I first started tracking this about 10 years ago, for every person that raised their hand to say, hey, I'm interested in volunteering in your family ministry, we usually got, I think it was about a third. Okay. By the time we went through the entire onboarding process, the recruiting process, about a third made it into the ministry. But when we designed this really electric, beautiful, compelling orientation, we got up to about 70 to 80% of people who said, yes, I want to come. They said yes, and then they actually started serving. So we got to create, what is the step that we're creating for people between we're inviting them to engage with us and them actually serving. What's the intentional step? Okay, Nick, what do you think?
The only thing I would add is the reason why we do this, and you kind of hit on that, is because it's more personal. If we have these smaller steps, we have conversation, or if there's a group, even an orientation, you get to meet some people. It's smaller steps, more personal, smaller steps, right? It's a big commitment. If I say, hey, so and so, especially if I didn't even know you, I met you in the lobby. Would you like to serve in our children's ministry? Like, that's a big step. Okay, that's a massive, massive step. People have fears about saying yes to things, and I think that's only worse now than it was before. Like your attendance in church, everything commitment wise, frequency wise, probably went down in church with attendance, with serving, whatever it is. And so basically meeting somebody, even if it's somebody and asking them to take that step, go right to serving, is too big a step. By doing this, you make it more personal, you make smaller steps, and you put in more vision. That's that orientation part, as opposed to here's a dry, boring application or whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Okay, let's hit this last step as we're starting to run out of time here. Okay, the last one is make the ask. Okay, I don't make the ask when I send that first email out. I make the ask when we're one-on-one or we're at that orientation or whatever it may be. And so here's a couple pointers under make the ask. Okay, the first one, we make the ask with vision. Okay, big vision. Okay, I love it. I think it's actually even funny. Sometimes I take this tour and we walk around and I say, hey guys, do you guys know that more than 80% of believers make the decision to follow Jesus between the ages of 4 and 14? The greatest work of evangelism in our church today around the world is in children's ministry. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Like who wouldn't be excited about serving in that way? When you cast big vision for that, it's hard for people to say no to that. When we walk around in our orientation, we look in the rooms and sometimes we'll walk by a room that's a little bit chaotic. Okay, maybe I've only got 2 volunteers in there, but I need 4. And I'll walk by that room and say, look at this room. And instead of letting that room scare them, of saying like, I believe that there's probably 2 people in this orientation that are going to come and they're become small group leaders for these kids, and they're going to change lives in this room. And I know that like 6 months from now, we're going to look back and we're going to see the great work that God is doing in the lives of these kids because 2 people in this orientation stepped up to say yes to that. So you want to make visionary ask. I talk about, because I believe in it. I believe that a small group leader can make the difference of life and death in the life of a child, in their spiritual life and in their relational life. And so I cast that vision, big vision. Second one, I want to make a very clear ask. Okay, clarity is important. In all my orientations and in my meetings, I have a it's the card, we call it, as an orientation response card. We share that card with you in Volunteer Boost and in Volunteer Pipeline. But when they finish their tour, we ask them very clearly, hey, what age group do you want to serve in? And they check a box. They don't just write it in, they just check a box. Infants, toddlers, preteens, whatever it may be. What role do you want to serve in? Small group leader, large group leader, worship leader, tech, guest services, exceptional needs. So we very clear, we have an area for notes at the bottom, but we're very clear. What services are you interested in serving? They check box those services. So make it super clear about what it is that they can actually choose to do. And then last of all, make the ask with boldness. Okay. I've learned over the years is that people aren't afraid to be asked to do big things. Actually, I think that people want to do something that matters. And so when we water down the ask and say, hey, we just need somebody, anybody really, we're really desperate. Whatever you can give. If you could serve once a month or something like that, that would be fine. Then we do a disservice and we cheat people from the opportunity to make a significant impact. So when I'm casting vision, when I'm making a clear ask, I say, like, I'll say when people ask, well, how long am I serving for? And sometimes I'll start with a joke. I said, oh, we're expecting that you'll serve till Jesus comes back. Right. And then we laugh. We all laugh. And I said, no, no, no. Here's the deal. Like, we want people to serve for a school year, but the way that we create this environment that you're going to build a relationship with kids, most of our volunteers do this for years, and you get to move up with your kids year after year. And every time I say that, people smile. Like, people smile. They look at each other like what, and they're excited about that. I frequently I talk. Here at Mariners, when I got here, only about 30% of our volunteers served weekly. 1 year later, about 70% of our volunteers serve weekly. So I use this in our orientation. Say, hey, almost every one of our volunteers serve weekly, and I don't want that to scare you. Like, we want people to live their life. You're going to go on vacation, you're going to work, but when you're in town, we want you to be here. We want you to build a relationship with these kids and with these parents. And so we make the invite for a big ask. We want you to serve every week. We want you to, it's a bold ask. So we want you to serve every week. We want you to serve in this role. We could see you doing this for a couple years. And like some of these second graders, you might be the person who helps lead them to the Lord and baptize them. Some of you might be stepping with a group of third graders, and you're going to lead with them over the line into junior high or into middle school. And people actually are excited about that kind of invite. So don't be afraid to make bold ask. Make a bold ask. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up here. Let me just clarify one more time, and then we'll bring Nick back. We're going to make the time. Okay, we're going to set aside the time that's needed to actually recruit the volunteers we need. We're going to make a list, or we're going to make multiple segmented list of who we're asking from our database, from relationships, all sorts of ways. We're going to make the invite. We're going to get really clear about what we're inviting them to, how we're inviting them, and what kind of language we're using. But we're not starting from scratch every single time we send out a message. We're going to use some templates that we've already created or that Ministry Boost has already created. We're going to make the step. What is it specifically that we're inviting them to? Is it a one-on-one conversation? For someone you don't know very well, that's probably a good first step. If they've already indicated that they're interested in serving, you probably want to invite them to a group dessert or to an orientation. I do 2 orientations every weekend. It's excessive. Before I got here to Mariners, I did 2 a month, which is a great rhythm. Okay, 2 a month, constantly inviting them to that. And then the last one is make the ask. Okay, don't be afraid. Don't be timid. Don't be afraid. Listen, I'm an Enneagram 7. I don't like confrontation. It's hard for me to make asks, but you can do it. Okay, it's worth it. It's good for them. It's good for the kids. We all know this. They will get more out of this than anything they give, because you have, as a ministry leader, you've gotten more out of it. So just share your story, share other stories, and make the big ask. Okay, Nick, let's wrap this up.
Yes, and most of this, we talked about how a lot of this content comes from courses, and it's kind of funny because when we created Volunteer Boost, the 28-day challenge to recruit more volunteers, Kenny, we would say that like a third of that was from Volunteer Playbook course that already existed, a third of it was from your Volunteer Pipeline course about onboarding, and then a third of it was new. And then here today, I feel like we've like whittled down even more, because what we just shared is, I don't know, 80% of the structure of Volunteer Boost, with maybe 20% of the tools and the tactics and the scripts and the things that you mentioned. So you might want to take that course. Go to volunteerboost.org if you want to do that. It's a 28-day challenge. It helps with the accountability that Kenny talked about. We do have email scripts, text scripts. There's more details with some of the steps. You get emails each day with what you're going to do. I think there's 30 videos or something like that. It's pretty.
And I think the power of that course as well is that spreadsheet that we give you. It's an automated spreadsheet where you put those names in there, and it helps you and your team. You're checking off phone calls that you make and contacts that you make, and it keeps you working people through the process.
It's true, but it might be membership. It might be membership, right?
It might be membership. It might be membership, because here's the deal. Like, and we tell people who are taking Volunteer Boost, like, this is like some of the best stuff out of a lot of our courses. But some of you may want to take 2 or 3 weeks to really refine your volunteer orientation. I think the volunteer orientation is the secret sauce to recruiting and onboarding more volunteers. Like, I'm completely convinced by it. But there's a lot of work to do to getting an orientation exactly the way that you want it, to where when somebody walks in your orientation, I'll say this, I'll throw this out, there's a number. Over the years, about 90% of the people who walked into my orientation became volunteers. Okay. So for me, then my goal is, how do I get as many people as possible to come to an orientation? Okay, so Volunteer Pipeline is a great course that you might want to dissect in that. Volunteer Playbook is an incredible course to help you with your recruiting and walk through all that. Frequency is a great course to help you move your volunteers from every other week or monthly to become weekly volunteers. So the benefit of membership is going to be that you can actually take several months to work through your team through multiple courses to really refine your volunteer processes to get better at that.
Yeah, with your team's a good qualifier. You know, whether you work on
Oh
staff
yeah,
with other staff people or you're just pulling in volunteers or some parents, don't do it alone. Like, there's no reason to
yeah.
do
If
any of
you're
this
if you're
alone.
by yourself, okay. So here's the breakdown. Volunteer Boost costs $47. Okay, it's 28 days of resource. It's amazing. It's less than $2 a day. Okay, it's beautiful. And my question always is how much is a volunteer worth? Okay, I would would you pay $47 for the 10 volunteers that you need? More than likely, I'd spend $47 on one volunteer. And some
Sure.
of you who get those text messages on Saturday nights before Sunday, you would spend a lot more than that to get another
That's
volunteer.
true. That's
So
very true.
volunteer
Price goes
boost,
up as the, weekend
right?
gets more into it.
Volunteer boost is $47. Membership is $27 a month. You get access to all the courses, including Volunteer Boost, including the volunteer resource, the bundle, all these other things. If you want to take your entire team through these courses, I think it's $47 a month, and it's amazing. It's amazing resources for you in that. So, any last things, Nick?
I'd say go start working on the 5 steps. I mean, the steps 1 and 2 you really could start doing right away, and go recruit more volunteers now.
That's great.
All right. I think we could take some questions. There's lots of good questions here. Kenny, I don't know how much time you have. I can stick around longer if folks that are watching want to stick around longer.
Yeah,
Um,
I've got about 10 minutes to
let's
stay.
start with
So,
the orientation questions then, Kenny, because that's definitely your
mhm,
wheelhouse with Volunteer Pipeline. The
yes.
question came up: how often and what do you cover?
Yeah, let me tell you that my secret. Okay, so for the longest time, I would do one orientation a month because I used to work at churches where we really only did orientations like maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and then the staff just onboarded people independently, and I started to see that every volunteer was onboarded differently, and some people knew some stuff, some people didn't know other stuff, and so then I started doing an orientation monthly, and here's what I found: if I have 10 people signed up for an orientation that I'm going to offer once a month, and even if it's not once a month, but if I have 10 people signed up, um, then on that weekend, I can probably count that half of them, five, are going to show up because people are going to get sick, kids are going to get sick, people are going to forget. And so I started to think then the next time they're available to come is a whole nother month. And then by the time the next month comes around, I got 10 people on the list again, those five that didn't come last time, maybe five new ones. And then on that weekend, guess how many show up? Only five. Okay. So I started to think, well, you know what? Maybe just for convenience sake, just to get people through this process faster, I'm going to start offering an orientation twice a month and see what happens. Then hopefully, I will get 10 volunteers a month instead of that because that five that couldn't come before. And what I found out was that when I started offering an orientation twice a month, I actually netted more than 10 volunteers. I started netting about 12 to 13 volunteers a month that would come through the orientation. And so then I put that in my course, and I've had dozens of other people take the course, and they increase their frequency to once a month to twice a month, and they saw the same exact thing happen again. And so when I got here to Mariners, I knew that we had a lot of volunteers to recruit. And so about 10 months ago, I started an orientation. I decided I'm going to do one on Saturday night and one on Sunday morning, and I'm going to offer it every week. And for the last probably 40 weeks, I've offered 2 orientations a weekend. And some weekends, I've got 2 or 3 people, sometimes one at each orientation. Sometimes I'll have 15 come. But for me, if I have 2 people come, it's worth my time. It's worth my time. So I'm always an encourager. Do orientations. Like if you're desperate, like you have a lot of spaces to fill, do them every week for a season, for 6 weeks. Do one every week, and just invite people. Hey, just show up. Show up to the 10 o'clock. We're going to do an orientation. We want you to come. I think a great rhythm is twice a month. I will probably never go to less than twice a month ever again, no matter where I'm at. At the orientation, the goal of it is vision. So I'm going to share. It's not highly informational. I talk about our lead small strategy of how we're trying to recruit small group leaders. It's the most important thing we're trying to do. We want kids to grow up never knowing what it's like to not be in a small group at church. We're casting the vision for for what it could look like to be a small group leader for a group of kids for 2 or 3 years. So it's a ton of vision. And then we go on a tour, we poke around, and at each area of the tour, we talk about what ministry looks like and what we're trying to do, where we use curriculum, what the curriculum looks like, what we do through camps and what we do through other mission trips and other experiences. Like I'm telling the story and telling individual stories about a kid who got baptized a few weeks ago by their small group leader. It's a lot of storytelling, a lot of vision. Come back down to where we start our orientation, and then I hand out the orientation cards, the response forms, and then I talk about the next steps. Okay, next step, fill out this card, fill out the application. We're going to have you come in for a first look. You get to be a fly on the wall, and we just talk through the process. And I'm telling you, every person in the room fills out that card. Every person in the room fills out that card. Even parents who come with their kids, their junior leaders, who are only there to support because we require the parents to come with their junior leaders. Most of those parents fill out the card too. They weren't planning on serving, but after they came through the orientation, they're like, yeah, I can do that. This would be great. I could do this with my son, and it's a great way to do. So hopefully that answers some of the questions about the orientation.
Yeah, that's good. I starred all the questions here so we could ask them. So let's see. Can I pop that on the screen? How do you get that many prospects when you're a small church? I need 15 volunteers for different areas and only have 65 to 70 attending. So part of it is what you said earlier, Kenny. If 65 to 70 are attending, it's probably at least 150 that are active, unless your church is just really good with frequency of attendance. You know what I mean? Like I would have said before the pandemic, that probably means 150 people to 180 are active. Now it might be 200. And then part of it is priority, because like Kevin also asked this question, which I think could be related, right? Kevin said, what happens when you have more opportunity than people? I'm a new pastor with new opportunities. Congrats on the new role, by the way. I think you got to prioritize the opportunities. You know what I mean? You have to maybe literally list them out. What is the most important, second most important, third most important, and then recruit to them. You're not really recruiting to them one at a time, because somebody might be better wired for opportunity 3 and somebody else might be better wired for opportunity 1. But I certainly would look at it like 2 different lists. Urgent, got to do it right now, and then could wait if we had to, and do it that way. So there's probably more people than you think. There is such a thing. One of the courses that we have is called 5 Barriers to Volunteer Recruiting. There is such a thing in all churches that there's too much competition and too many things. Now, most churches, there's still enough people to do a lot of the things, but the smaller church gets, the more that's true. And so it could be that there's actually too many opportunities in the church, and you got to decide, what are we going to do and what are we going to not do? It's like that stop doing list. You got to go back to that and say, we're going to cut these, or at least put those things on hold.
And I would say, again, and we also talked about this, as the quality of the leads as well. It may not be a 10-time multiplier. So if you got 65, 75 people on your list, you need 15 volunteers. That's a very doable. 15 volunteers from a list of 75 is actually very doable. It's also, so one of the things is it's the quality of the lead, but it's also the quality of the ask as well. It could be you need 15 volunteers, then it might be you knocking on their front door, and having a meeting with them. Like sometimes I threatened that with my team. I was like, you know what, we're going to make home visits, and so sometimes it's the quality of the ask. And so if you make a more compelling ask, it might be more likely that they say yes, or you might just have to work harder. And so for 15 people, I could put that time in to get 15 out of 75 people. Maybe so. I could possibly do that. So again, it's not science, although it is a numbers game. There is a certain, like the reason why we say the 10 multiplier is because that's kind of tends to be an average, but you can do better or worse at that. It varies on both sides.
Yeah. How about this? It's so hard after pandemic to recruit. People are afraid to get COVID. That's true. That's part of why we named this 5 steps to recruit volunteers now. Now is part of like urgently, like right now. But the other part of now is it is different with COVID. But my best advice for this is what I'm doing right now when I'm building my prospect list. I actually built it off of people that I think are already involved in attending. So now granted, if there's like somebody who used to serve, or they're still in a small group and they only watch online, I might include them in the prospect list too, because we all know, if we're honest, that there's a difference between people who aren't attending because of COVID safety concerns, and there's other people who aren't attending and it's just because a habit went away and now they're not attending. It's not actually a safety concern. But you could ignore all that and just build your list as best you can. This is where it gets hard, off of who's already coming. Because I don't know about your church, Kenny, but I know your church is doing this. A lot of our churches are seeing new people. And what happens is we know them less. So we got to search our database for how they've made themselves known. And maybe you just recruit from that pool. My list, when I started to build the list I'm talking about doing right now, it was almost 2,000 people. When I started filtering for like some level of involvement, groups, attendance, serving, filled out a prayer request. I mean, there's like your kids come, your students come. Like that's how I figured out who's actually in person attending. It went all the way down to I think 400 or something like that, and that's okay.
Right.
That'll be my list. You know.
And I'm going to say this too. This may come across as brash, and I'm not a brash person. But when people ask me the question, like, "Well, what about COVID?" People are less likely to volunteer. I say that question comes across a little bit like a crutch, because the reality is that most of us don't do a good job at recruiting anyway. We don't put the time in. We don't expand the list big enough anyway. Yes, there is a demographic in your church today that didn't exist before that are afraid of getting COVID. And so they're not going to be willing to serve. But there's still a bunch of people that we just haven't asked yet. And a lot of them are new. Most churches have grown significantly during COVID of new people that are coming in. Listen, I have a list. I have a spreadsheet with like 200 people on it that are not serving because of COVID. And I wish I could have access to them right now, because we'd be in a very different place right now. But I'm having to develop new list and recruit new groups of people. So I would just say, like, just push through. There is a large audience at your church who they're not afraid of getting COVID. Now, if they tell you that, it could be an excuse, maybe, I don't know. But there's opportunities. There's opportunities. We just have to make the time and make the list.
Real quick, last question for you, Kenny. Do you have a second meeting after the orientation, like for onboarding, so you can hit those policies and the boring stuff? But it's really boring.
Oh gosh, I'm not gonna be that guy and says, "Well, you're gonna have to buy the course to find out." No, what I'll tell you, yes, the volunteer pipeline, it is all mapped out, and I use this really cool visual of the boxes. You're working people through boxes, and there's boxes that lead up to the orientation, and then there's boxes that happen after the orientation, and each box is a step in the process. So yes, the way I like to do it is we use a volunteer apprenticeship guide, and it's a checklist. And so we ask people to come to two, we call them observations, okay? And in each observation, they are checking off the boxes of all the things that they're learning that include some policies, check in, check out, diaper changing, where certain things are. And so it's part of they're observing, but they're also learning, and we're checking it off to make sure that everyone, because I got tired of people saying, I never really got trained. I signed up to volunteer. I got thrown into a classroom. I'm tired of that. I don't ever want somebody to use that excuse again. So we have a checklist, and we got, oh, no. Here's the checklist. We trained you in this. Look, there's your name. You signed the bottom of it. And, but then we do ministry safe. So we do like our child abuse training. That's a video online. We do an interview. So like all those things, you build those out in the step. I usually tell people when they come to an orientation, as early as next week or the week after, you can be back for our first look, okay, where you're getting to be in a classroom. So you could be in a classroom as early as a week or two from now, but it might take 3 to 5 weeks to complete the onboarding process. By the time every single call's been made, every single form's been signed, every single piece of training has happened, and we're working both those things concurrently. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yep, that's good. You probably got to run. There's 3 questions left. I'm going to hit them real quick. One here, Kayla said, my church is currently without a pastor, is in the process of searching for a new one. How do you get volunteers when people don't want to commit and you're in the middle of a pastor search? I would say people not wanting to commit is a big theme now. That's part of why it's harder now. It was already hard before. It's harder now. The answer is simple. It's not easy, but it is actually simple. The vision and your relationship have to outweigh their concerns. And so that's probably a lot of one-on-one conversations, and it's getting to know them and getting them to feel that and cast the vision in the midst of that. And like, it has to outweigh their concerns, and for some it will, for some it won't. But the more you talk, the more you build a relationship, and the more you cast the vision, the more likely that could happen. So that does make it harder though. But that's true of so many things right now. How do you get senior adults involved? My answer to this is you need 2 or 3 influential senior adults who are already involved, and you meet with them. And you ask them this question. How do we get more people? You do such an awesome job at this in our church. It may not even be in your ministry. How do we get more folks that involved? And you can be very specific about it. It's not like you have to tiptoe around the idea that, hey, I'm asking you because you're older. no, you can name that. I mean, they understand this. They probably in a small group with other folks. They know people in the church, and I think unless you're in that age demographic yourself, you probably need to tap in there. You probably don't have the relationship that you need to ask that. Last one, what is the key to recruiting men in ministry? That's a tough one too. I would go back to relationship and vision. Relationship and vision. And you got to have things well put together. Again, there's so many stereotypes we could get in here as we talk about recruiting men in ministry. I don't know if you've seen this, Kenny. I would actually say of the things that have changed since the pandemic, when like commitment has gone down, I actually do think it's worse among men. That it is. I've not measured that, but just in our church with all the people I know, there are more men not back serving than there are women if we did the math on it. And so I think we got to lean in more. Got more
Well,
relationship.
and I would say too, and I'd say this to a lot of people too, is that I'm a man in children's ministry. I have a team of staff, and it's 95% women, 5% men, and that's been my world for 25 years. I would say that we need to. I would challenge all the female pastors to create a ministry that men would want to serve in as well. Like, be mindful of that. I'm careful about the shirts that I make my volunteers wear. Like, is it a shirt that I, as a dude, would want to wear? And is it a shirt that other dudes in the ministry would want to wear? So just be mindful of those sorts of things. Partner with the men's ministry, partner with other men in your church to show that serving with kids is a very manly thing to do, and a very important thing for men to do. And we would cast vision, even like when I tell stories from the stage, when I tell stories with people, I tell a lot of stories of men who are leading in the ministry. I want girlfriends to, and wives to elbow their boyfriends or their husbands to say, like, you should do that, so but that's hard. It's always going to be less, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, and men that do serve, recruiting other men to serve is good too, but you probably will have to get them to do it. Even they're probably not going to be that bold either. But it's like, hey, who's
Right.
in your group that's not serving? And it's the same idea as going to the senior adults. Like, okay, you have influence, you've got men in your group, other men here. Like, okay, I need your help. Let's create a plan together, of how we can recruit some more men. I think that's important. Cool.
Okay,
Aisha
that was
asks, would you
awesome.
be willing to share your checklist format, Kenny? Maybe you could email Kenny at ministryboost.org if there's something that you could share there. I was probably too busy looking at the other questions to even know exactly what that
Yeah,
means.
send me an email, and I'd be happy to send it to you. But just know, I'm going to make a bold ask.
I was waiting for you to mess up that in the live webinar, the ask word. I was a little cautious there.
Yeah, you have to be
So
very careful when you talk about making a big ask.
it's a family channel. This is
Yeah,
good, appropriate for
this is a
kids.
family webinar.
We
Thank
hope
you,
this has
guys.
really helped you. Maybe you'll take volunteer boost or membership, maybe not. But either way, we wanted to leave you with real things you can go do to recruit. So go recruit and email us and tell us how it goes. Nick at
Hey, can we?
ministryboost.org, Kenny at
I,
ministryboost.org.
I'd love to pray. Let me pray for everyone real quick, because this is a real thing. Okay,
It
that
is.
everyone's struggling with. They need more volunteers. So let me pray for us. God, I just thank you so much for this camaraderie of community of people that are in it. And Lord, we're leading churches, leading ministries, and Lord, we need people. Lord, you said in your gospels that the harvest was plentiful, but the workers were few. You identified with this need that we have. And so, Lord, we pray to the Lord of the harvest that you would send workers into your harvest. So, Lord, I just pray for everyone that's a part of this today, Lord, that they would do the hard work, that they would be smart, they would be efficient, but Lord, they would see new workers come to work into your harvest. So, Lord, I just pray that you give everyone wisdom, and you give them creativity, and that you would give them the endurance to continue to push on. Lord, I pray for courage to make big asks of people to jump in and serve in this way. In Jesus' name I pray.